I would like to draw your attention that this public hearing will be filmed and transcript will be published afterwards on the State Assembly website. All electronic devices, so just remind myself as well, including mobile phones, should be switched on to silent.
Yeah.
We will start with introduction. Deputy Nagardina, Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Deputy Christina Moore, Vice Chair.
Vijay Korea, lay member.
Deputy Karen Wilson, panel member.
Deputy Raluca Kovac, member of the committee.
Graham Phipps, lay member.
And in attendance of Controller and Auditor General.
Panel CNAG, thank you.
And we have Deputy.
And Helen Thompson, Deputy CNAG.
Andrew, please introduce.
Yes, so Andy Skate, I'm the Chief Officer for Infrastructure and Environment.
Stephanie Knight, Head of Governance and Change.
Ioana Teslaro, Business Change Manager.
And we'll start first question with Deputy Kovac.
The infrastructure and the environment as a department received the second most complaints and compliments, 336 complaints and 163 compliments in 2023. How does this affect your resources?
Yes, a good question. We do have some dedicated focus on complaints, certainly this year, last year. It's been a big focus for us as a department. We centre most of our coordination of complaints within our head office for administration. We do rely on obviously complaints to be dealt with within the department, so where the services are. So does it affect resources? It does affect resources. I think it does take people's time. It does take time out of the week to deal with those. But I guess it's part of our job. It's we as a department we are very interactive with the public. We have a lot of interactions sort of with services that people don't choose to take from us. They sort of get, we look after the environment, look after a lot of physical things. So a lot of our customers are also passive customers as well as active customers. So I guess it's one of those that, it does take resource, but it's one of those areas that we accept.
Would you say you have sufficient resources to address in timely manner the complaints coming in?
I think on the whole, I think we do. It's always nice to have more resource. We could do more with more. But I think on the whole, we do. I think our response rates are generally good, and we always try and get back to customers within the time that we should get back to them, and using the system. So it's been a real focus for us over the last 24 months. So I think on the whole, the answer is probably a neutral answer. I mean, we could do more with more for sure.
What do you say are the main reasons or themes you see in the complaints, and how do you plan to address those?
Yeah, I've got some. Because we've got such variety of services. So we get a lot of reports of complaints whereby things are broken. There's a pothole. There's a tree falling down. So people use a lot of interactions for reporting. We also provide quite a lot of services, permitting, as an example, you apply for things. So we get a lot of interaction from customers who actually ask for permits. People who are regulated against, not everyone likes to be regulated against. So it's a real variety of things. We get, probably, how do I get services? Property becomes, we deal with all government property, so we get quite a lot of comment around that. Probably, behaviours, it's about customer behaviours, I think, probably, as well. And then in some of our high-profile decision-making areas, it's probably unsurprising we get a bit of complaint in those, or more customer interaction planning decisions being examples. But some of our regulatory services, we have a lot of people who apply for things, and a lot of people who interact with us because they don't like people applying for things as well. So it's a real mixture.
If I could add to that, so what we try to do, we have, and this is part of my role as Business Change Manager with responsibility across infrastructure and environment, that I'm responsible for designing and driving our customer action plans as part of our customer strategy. So we always strive to look at lessons learned and opportunities to improve, and trying to shape, I suppose, our customer-centric culture in INE, which we are in the process of maturing. And just to highlight some of the top 3 themes and how these have changed from 2023, we had in 2023 how access services, property assets, and attitude and behavior. And through our customer action plans, our training, our communication to staff, we have tried to make sure that we have fewer complaints that and feedback that stems from and relates to attitude and behavior. And it was pleasing to see that we have achieved that in 2024, where now our top 3 themes are how access services, property assets, which again, for the nature of the services that we provide in our department is always going to feature in the top 3. But then the third one was consistency of information, which now gives us another challenge to try and address that. But that's always something that we strive to do, to look at lessons learned and make sure that our colleagues in our department do everything possible to meet customers' needs.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'm not sure how much data you brought with you, but it would be useful to understand both in percentage and numbers from the total complaints you received, how many were upheld and how many unresolved, and what were the reasons?
Oh, okay. Do we have
I
that,
don't
Stephanie?
think
Do
we have that
yeah,
precise data. However, we did look into the data related to the unresolved.
Do you have it to send it at a later date, or you don't gather that data?
I think I can talk a bit
Yeah, we've got
around
the
this. So we had, in 2023, and I understand that this is information that was provided to the panel initially, we had a number of what was classed as unresolved complaints, but I know the terminology has changed to make it a bit more accurate, so it was really cases where we couldn't really address what was being raised. So we had, I think it was 63 cases in 2023, but just to put it in context, that was 0.08% of the total cases that we received in terms of feedback. So we always strive to make sure that we resolve the feedback that was presented to us. And in comparison, because of course we always look at our unresolved complaints, in 2024 we have managed to drive that number down to 33 to date. Of course, there's another month to go, but that's 0.04% compared to 0.08%.
Something that mentioned up for me,
Sure.
I need to understand. So you have 336 complaints and 163 compliments. So from 336, 63 cases unresolved doesn't sound like zero, whatever.
I suppose I'm using figures that are more up to date now, up to November. So we had.
No, how many complaints did you have?
Okay, in the period, the first quarter, three quarters of 2024, we had, let me just have a look, we had 774 pieces of feedback in total in the department.
How many
So,
complaints?
Complaints, 343, but my percentages were worked off the base.
Able to address?
We have, I know the information that you received from 2024, we had a spike in complaints related to Fort Regent. And that was really around the decant of sport from Fort Regent and opening of the new gym at Springfield. We had, there were a number of reasons. One, customers were using our feedback channels to vent their frustrations following the public consultation that had closed at that point because they felt that their concerns weren't being addressed or they weren't being heard. So they were raising issues around the differences in space provision at the new gym at Springfield compared to Fort Regent. They were complaining about the lack of sauna, for example, but we couldn't make provisions for that at Springfield due to limitations with space there. They were complaining and providing feedback with regard to the showering facilities. Of course, there was more space at Fort Regent compared to Springfield. The size of classes, gym classes, of course, we had to reduce the size to meet the space provision in Springfield, and we had much bigger rooms at Fort Regent. So that was all, it was frustrating for us because we knew we couldn't do anything with that feedback, but we also knew
Just
it
a minute,
was.
you couldn't do anything with this feedback, I understand, because it was after. But government should do something with this feedback because we're talking about customers that are not happy with the services that have been cut and were provided. So what government is doing, how you took this feedback, analyzed that feedback, where this feedback was presented and how this feedback would be addressed. instead of saying it's unresolved, our part we closed it, we forget about it.
So was this signposted at all to other departments to look into it, or? Yeah.
So for instance, there was certainly a wave of complaints when people went from the Fort gym to the new gym. Some of that is just because it was new, and some of that's now died off again because people had to travel differently, park differently. There were slightly different sort of arrangements. If I look at class bookings, for instance, at Springfield, we've had a lot of people trying to book into classes, which I guess we're a victim of our own success. A lot of people want to access the classes. What we've been trying to do is make sure that if people are block booking and not turning up, it's sort of that the do not shows on the bookings. It's sort of taking capacity out of the system. So I guess, the active team are constantly looking at people who are booking, and if they're not turning up for their sessions, then we've got to be, we're a lot clearer on those customers. You can't book 10 sessions ahead. You've got to turn up for your session. So some of it is because it is a different environment. We've had new premises and they are just different from the previous premises. So we had for a period of time, actually, a lot of people not happy. Actually, we also had the vast majority of people actually were quite happy as well, but they don't choose to tell us. That's now dropped off a bit. So it's just one of those areas where...
No, but to be honest, we had reduced services to the public. We've gone from 2 gyms, 2 sport facilities, to 1 sport facility, which smaller, the smaller than the previous one. So we do have reduced sport facilities. Now, the feedback was we're not happy with only this place for 1 small facilities. Is it any, and the feedback can. I understand that and on your department level, completely understand you cannot address this, and it's not about you. The question from Deputy Kovac was,
Has been signposted,
how you signpost where you have raised and what's happening to address the concerns that were raised. It was not specifically for your department, but it was, like I said, it was useful actually saying what we are thinking about sports facilities on the island.
Yeah,
and if it will be addressed.
So some of the conversation around Active is new gym facilities at Oakfield, as well as the new sports centre at Oakfield. The new Oakfield Sports Centre is under construction, but certainly the gymnasium is a new offer at Oakfield. So some of it is, in terms of some of the customer responses, we can't immediately sort that out, but we are aware of where people, some of the responses, you will get used to these new services, they're just different. And a lot of customers say, that's okay, we're now happy, we've got used to the new arrangements. Some people have chosen to go to other private gyms rather than our own public gyms. And some are looking at the future thinking, okay, well, I can't wait for that new facility. So I guess it's a combination of all of those.
What I would ask as well is, due to the nature of your department, is there crossover on what you see in complaints with the parishes, the parish responsibilities?
Certainly we get, yes, there is. So where we've got certainly reporting of faults, if I can call them that, walls, roads, trees. Generally, a lot of islanders may not necessarily know whether it's a government road, for instance, or a parish road. So our Love Jersey app is where we get a lot of reporting through, and within there the job gets allocated to whether it's parish authority or government authority to deal with.
Okay, thank you.
So I was simply going to ask, really, given that we are at the bottom of the OECD league table in terms of civic engagement, does the department, and also alongside its fellow departments, take into consideration any response when you see a spike in activity in relation to a particular issue? On the one hand, perhaps there's a duty to celebrate the fact that people are expressing their views and having a voice, and so in terms of that response, is the consideration given to that importance of people feeling able and open to expressing their views when giving and handling the response?
Yeah, I would say we're very encouraging. We want more feedback, and I think our stats for this year, there's more feedback coming into the department than last year. We do get an awful lot of feedback. One of our big challenges is making sure we record that feedback. So a lot of people, certainly whether it be staff or customers, may not necessarily say, I want that logged as a complaint or a compliment. So some of it is we do training around that to make sure that if we are getting that coming in, we are we are logging it on the system effectively, so we can capture more of that. So
Yeah, but will the people who have raised those issues about Springfield, to stick with that example, have seen that their feedback has been accepted or at least acknowledged, and some changes have been put into place in result of their feedback?
One of the things that we introduced this year was actually You Said We Did type campaign. We felt that was really important to actually use the social media platforms and actually then share that information, because obviously it's all valuable feedback. All of our feedback is acknowledged. It's passed on to the relevant case manager and responded as quickly as possible. So yes, it is prioritised. Yeah.
yeah, so are we perfect? We're probably not perfect, but we're certainly over the last couple of years, we're making real efforts to make sure we're sort of encouraging response, logging and getting back to people on a more regular basis. We're certainly not there yet, but I think the trend is good. And there's something I do every now and then. I'll go into the system, see what's outstanding. I'll chase officers to say, you've got a complaint that's outstanding it's due in 2 days. Are you on it? Type dialogue. And so, generally people.
Where things have gone really well.
And in terms of issuing, in terms of issuing acknowledgements, we have tried to make our processes even more robust. So we take ownership within head office to make sure that acknowledgements are sent within 48 hours, so that people know that their feedback has been received and it has been passed on. We provide information with regards to the next point of contact. So.
But would you follow up? Like, for example, there is nothing to do with the showers.
Yes, always.
So you said, thank you for submitting. What would be the next one?
Always, they would then get a response to the actual feedback that they provided.
Okay.
And if there is a need for an extension, because maybe the nature of the feedback that was provided requires more time for investigation, we make sure that members of the public and the people that have present that feedback know, and we manage those expectations, because we know it's frustrating when you're sitting and waiting for a response and it doesn't come.
Okay, thank you.
Talking about the total number of complaints in 2023, how many of those has been necessary to go to stage 2 or 3 to be seen by a more senior?
We don't have those numbers here from the top of our heads, but we can provide that. Yeah.
Yes, please.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, certainly at stage 3, because that's when I tend to get involved. I don't see that many of those. I think if I can think about the last maybe 1 or 2 months, I've probably had maybe 2 of those at that level. We do resolve quite a lot within the system, and
then what themes
the
it
wider
was?
departmental system.
What are the themes that came to you, kind of
So
general?
generally, I think we have a struggle with a lot of people are logging complaints which may not be appropriate for the system, because they are really complaints about a decision which there might be other remedies for. So if I look at planning, or if we issued regulatory decisions, that's a good example where people are. They're either they really want to complain about the decision they've received, and they really should be going through an appeal or another form of complaint process, or we get complaints where we've chosen not to act, and we haven't regulated because it's been a small scale. So but I certainly see the last 2 ones, the last 2 occasions I've seen is where people think we should have done more, and it's around the lack of action rather than the action prompting an appeal. So I think that's one area we're working with our regulation director on.
Relations.
We have to explain when we don't act as much as when we do act, because obviously when we do act, some people don't like that either. But actually, I think we need to explain more why we haven't acted in some respects. So.
Okay, thank you.
I think you've addressed, I had 2 lines of questioning. One was the improvements made based on your customer feedback, and I think you've given some good examples of specific feedback.
Yeah.
Had you considered, or what steps are you taking at a macro level to share with the public at large the kinds of changes you're making and the things that are happening so that
Yeah.
have you thought about that, and are
We
steps
have
in
thought
place
about, and
at a
actually just
macro level?
preparing for this process has been really useful, because actually it's prompted us to think what we should be doing is a regular public report on what we are doing with our customer data. We have a lot of customer data. We have a lot of customer interactions. We tend to keep that to ourselves, and we talk to the customer, but actually we don't talk more widely about that. So we don't produce an annual customer report of any kind. But actually, this process has been really helpful because we actually have a lot of data here,
We can ask you to come more often.
which we could really easily produce, whether it be a year end or a half year
I think that's,
report. So I think, it's something
do
we.
two things. It could demonstrate you're listening, and it could also demonstrate that sometimes it makes a difference. So
I think one of the
sounds-
challenges we've had as well, some of our customer interaction is about education as well, saying this is what we do for you in the island. We do an awful lot of public service, and so we've been trying to address some of that. We have our Keep the Island Running campaign and things like that, so a bit more proactive messaging. But certainly I think you said we did, and this is what's resulted. I think we could do a lot more on that.
The other side of that is the receptiveness to receive complaints, because that could turn people off very quickly.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about the kind of training. What kind of initiatives do you have to enable your organization to be receptive to complaints and handle them?
There's quite a lot to say on that. Firstly, from my perspective, we ensure that our management structure have got customer care and customer within their objectives. So that's a key thing for us. So that we're telling all of the extended management team and the leadership of the department that customer behaviour is important. So that's the key thing. And then we do quite a bit of training, which I can hand over to Stephanie to talk about.
We've got a whole range of training. So we've got the corporate training. So we have some mandatory online training that all colleagues have access and are required to do. We have some bite-sized, like espresso sessions, like 2 hours, that managers can access. We've got various online e-learning training as well, but we also ensure that we've got in-person training, because obviously that's really, really important, using real-life scenarios, so taking previous cases, anonymising them, of course, and then using those in the kind of classroom in-person sessions. We've done that in conjunction with CLS, who've provided a lot of support for us, but we've also done that in-house in I&E as well, in the areas where we've seen spikes in feedback, and we've then used their scenarios and then gone over that with them. So there's lots of interventions in place to provide that support and just improve engagement and awareness and training, really, with those individuals.
So the exact opposite of this question is, how do you ensure, because you can do everything and our budget can go skyrocketing.
Yeah.
So how do you ensure that the kinds of actions you're taking are cost effective and getting a bang for your buck? I suspect that lies in your
I guess
shoulders.
my view on that is part of everyone's day job, effectively, because we deal with every islander every day. So whether they like it or not, actually, most of the island interacts with our services. So I guess whatever we do, whether it be walking on the road, swimming in the sea, walking on the beach, putting your bin out, we're involved in people's lives from dawn to dusk, literally at every point of their journey through the day. And as a result of that, what we try and make clear at our induction sessions, at our training sessions, at our management sessions, that we are part of people's lives. We have from first flush to last light. Effectively, we've been there somewhere in your journey. Whether you've eaten out, whether you've been online shopping, whether you've been swimming in the sea, whether you've been in a government building, I&E has been there somewhere. So I think that for me, it's part of our day job. We've got to take it like that.
You know what, if I'm asking, sorry, if there are any other examples similar to the Fort Regent examples, when you are collecting customer feedback, but it's actually not for your department, you've just been chosen as submit the feedback. Do you have any other examples?
I actually have probably a good example that springs to mind, and it was an example where we had to take a bit of action, but it was spanning across departments. And this is something that we have tried to do a lot as part of our customer strategy and action plans this year to inspire colleagues to own our customers, so that.
Can you give me an example?
Of course.
Yeah.
So in this particular case was related to lack of clarity over the need to apply for planning permission when applying for hosting weddings at a specific venue, for example. And there was no information on the website of the Superintendent Registrar's Office, that's it. Of course, this is this case spans across departments and agencies. So what our colleagues in planning did, they made sure that the customer was only liaising with us, so they got the response from us, but we took ownership, we liaised with the Office of the Superintendent Registrar, made sure that their website was updated with the relevant information for planning, and we also looked for opportunities to make it even better, hopefully, to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And our colleagues reached out to the Comité de Connétable, so we're trying now to work with parishes, so when constables, as part of the process of applying for a wedding permit, they speak to members of the public, they then consult themselves with the planning team on behalf of that customer to ensure that the need for a planning application is then communicated to the customer.
Okay, thank you.
So you've mentioned that you have a vast number of different activities.
Yes,
One specific one is your enforcement function. Can you tell us something about the complaints received for enforcement, the themes, the numbers that have escalated, things like this, please?
Yeah, so a lot of we have compliance functions around a number of sort of regulatory decisions. So a lot of those are centred in our regulation directorate, so they're planning, building related, so construction related. We also have a lot of nuisance complaints in our environmental health consumer protection function. So they range from people have built things in the wrong things, tends to be neighbour complaints against neighbour. Someone has been up to something next door, and we often get we often find ourselves between neighbours because of building generally. Or we find ourselves between neighbours on noise nuisance, or dogs or animals and those sort of things, smells. We also regulate housing complaints, so housing standards. So it's a vast variety of things in that area. And then we've got other regulatory functions around highways, drainage, things like that. So we get, say, for instance, drainage smells, because people have been putting the wrong things down the drains and they're blocked and those sort of things. So there is a real variety of incoming complaints. Our general approach is, a lot of it is education. We have to educate first of all. So some people just don't know the rules, so we have to do that. Persuasive compliance, I guess, is our phrase. We have to try and get people to comply. Most of what we deal with, it's not life or death matters. So we try and get resolution through persuasion. It's quite rare for us to get to the final end of that approach where you have to issue formal notices and go to court. That's, it's single digit percentages, 1 or 2%, I think would probably be in that category. Most of our complaints are resolved by visits, whether it be to restaurants, whether it be to, neighbours. Sometimes we obviously have to issue notices, statutory nuisance notices, those sort of things around noise, smells, planning enforcement. So a lot of our planning enforcement tends to be small scale building. It's generally neighbour disputes, I would really summarise as.
So you're describing the requests for services that come into your department, whereas I think we're more focused on the complaints about the service that's provided.
Yes, yeah. So we have a lot of customer interaction because that people aren't applying for things, but they are complaining about things that are occurring in the environment. So that's where most of our enforcement cases are. Most of our complaints around service are those people who are applying for things and they feel either they haven't had the decision that they wanted, they may have not had the decision in a timely enough fashion, not quick enough, or they may feel it's been a bit officious. So they tend to be in those sort of areas, really.
Okay, but drilling down into specifically enforcement. So a decision has already been made, and now it's the relevant officer's job to go out and enforce that decision, whether it's a planning decision, or so on and so forth. Do you receive complaints in a substantial number of complaints in relation to that particular function?
I wouldn't say we do get some complaints because generally people do not like to be enforced, so they will feel hard done by. That they've been at the sharp end of the department. Sure. What we try and do, as I said, is to try and do that in I guess a gentle enough way as possible. Persuasive compliance is our mantra, I think. But people sometimes break the law because they don't understand the planning law on these sort of things. Sometimes people get a refusal for a planning consent and go and build it anyway. That's when to a degree, they should know better because we've already been formal about it, and they'll often get an enforcement notice. So there are cases where we issue a formal legal notice. You have to comply within a certain time. If you don't comply, you'll end up getting taken to court. Most of the time, people will comply, but as I said, it's quite a small
Do
percentage.
these result in complaints about the department?
We do get complaints. Yes, we do. We do get complaints. Some people they sometimes will feel we're being heavy-handed, and I think enforcement is a really delicate area because as much as people complain about being enforced against, there's always complainants who have raised the case in the first place and want a lot more punishment in the system. And actually, we try and be even-handed to both parties. I think that's probably one of our real challenges. Because if you're complaining against somebody, you tend to want them punished. They've broken the law, I want something. Whereas we're trying to be even-handed, it may be a business, we've got to be even-handed to them as well. So yeah, it's quite a difficult balance for our compliance functions. So that's why it is a struggle often. There's often no right answer.
I just minded about the time. Do we have another 10 minutes if we need?
Yeah, of course.
Because apparently we have more than we expected.
I'm talking on behalf of Stephanie and all of it. I'm sure we can. Yeah.
So moving on to the regulatory and the planning aspects of your department, what percentage of complaints received tend to relate to those aspects of the work?
We don't have the precise data for that with us. We can provide that afterwards. I would say we have an even split across our services. We do, of course, see those planning ones, but there is a mixture. Some of the more complex stage 3 ones have been more focused in that area.
We can certainly
you just described really
get a breakdown of what's currently in the what we've seen in the system. I think the challenge we have certainly in planning services is that we get the complaints system being used as a bit of a proxy appeal, and there is a formal appeal system against decisions that people can use. Obviously that's a paid service with the judicial graph, so people have to pay to appeal. So that tends to be a first party or third party appeal on a decision. A lot of interactions are, I would pretty much summarise that applicants tend to want a yes very quickly, and complainants or objectors, they tend to want a no very quickly, and we're in the middle of that very often. So it's a real balance.
If I could just bring add as well to that point, is that I think in terms of our priorities for next year, we have seen a trend that we have got some of those cases emerging within CFMS, and we're going to do sort of a bit of analysis on that because we want to be really clear about actually about customer expectations of CFMS, and if there is a statutory process that's aligned, we need to make sure that those two things aren't conflated.
Forgive my ignorance, it's CFMS.
Sorry, the Customer Feedback Management System.
Thank you. Okay, sorry.
I would, before we move to the next question, and it is connected enforcement and also your department, you are a regulator, but
Yes, we
you
are.
also
We're also on the other side sometimes.
you're also other side. And how
Yeah.
do you manage the conflicts? Because recently 2 constituency cases, very, very different one that I'm dealing with, actually complaining that the department not enforce decision made by the planning which are connected to acting, which was made against the government properties needs to be vacated, for example, or something needs to happen to the government properties, but the department is not acting to enforce planning decision.
Okay.
So how do you deal with it?
I guess if I start with my role, clearly I oversee both operational applicant responsibilities as well as regulator responsibilities. So we have a conflict protocol in place between myself and the regulation director, which effectively says that I cannot I cannot use my management authority to direct a decision in our favour. So it's quite clear that if we are the applicant, and say it's a property application, then that sits with the regulation director, it doesn't sit with me. We further define that by the chief planning officer under the law is the regulation director, not the chief officer. So that's another variation specific to that law that we've made. So that effectively gives some insulation to the regulation directorate to be independent in their decision making when it relates to government the rest of the department's activities. So we've got some of those principles in place. We've also got sort of conflict resolution processes in place and just conflict declaration processes in place within regulation. And that's something we've really been working on over the last, I would say, certainly 2 years. But there's a lot more declarations of interest. And if anything, we ask people to err on the side of caution if there is a declaration of interest.
So, but if it's coming to the stage 3 complaint, and you
Yes,
said the
yeah.
stage 3 complaint coming to yourself as a chief officer
Yeah,
of the department, but if stage 3 complaint currently sitting for non-enforcement of the decision, would it still be with yourself, or would it be stage 3 complaint will go to somebody else?
I could answer that. Under the customer feedback policy, there is a provision that the stage 3 cases can be directed to a chief officer from another department or a third party. So we know we have means within the policy in those instances, if we ever have a case like that, to not involve Andy.
So if I've already been involved with a case for a certain reason, I can't sit in judgment of that case. So there are occasions where you have to pass that to
No,
someone
it is
else.
helpful because
Yes,
at least to case of my life, I need to see where it's going. Yeah.
And do you have to police that yourself, or?
We do generally, yes, yeah. So it does rely on officers' ethical behaviour effectively to self-declare. If anything, I see a lot more declarations of interest because people are more worried about not declaring an interest. So we certainly see a lot more of that within regulation. They may know the applicant. They might live close to them, that sort of thing. So
Okay. Thank you.
Deputy Gardner just was preemptive there. She asked my question.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
No, it wasn't
just to
about the
follow-
statutory nuisance.
No,
so
no,
it was something different.
It was something different. But can I just carry that on a little bit? So the roles in the department are educator, regulator, and service provider. Yeah. Okay. So I'm interested in the views around the role of business change. So where are the powers for change invested in the department in each of those areas? Because I assume any change to the law, you would have to take that somewhere else. That's not actually contained within the department's responsibilities.
yeah. So where we feel there is a process, if it's a legal change, I would expect that to come from sort of direct the management team working with the minister to suggest a change. We effectively break the department into 2 heads of expenditure. So we have 2 primary ministers, the Environment and Infrastructure Minister. The Regulation Directorate does report to a number of other ministers. So some of their laws are Economic Development Minister laws. So crash helmets this week has been an example of that. It comes under Consumer Protection Law, which sits with the Minister of Sustainable Economic Development. So housing law is another one with some of the housing ministers' responsibilities sit there. So I think ideas for change, I would expect they're sometimes externally driven because there are issues that we have to pick up and move with. Some of it is driven by, I guess, international convention or standards that we're trying to follow. Some of it's driven because we know we've just got out-of-date laws and we need to improve those. So I would expect generally those to be led by head of service and director level, and then we will take that to the relevant minister to drop it into the work programme. So we've got we work with the law drafting team in terms of available resources and what's in the policy pipeline as to what resources we've got to support policy change and then legal change.
Thanks, Andy. So I would guess when it gets to a stage 3, all of that complexity in some shape or form is organised as to who the accountability rests with for resolution.
Yes.
Or does it always come back to you as the department?
It tends to be at a stage 3. So the last couple of stage 3s I've dealt with, I've interviewed the director who's generally dealt with it at stage 2. And then we've sat down as a team, effectively a bit of an interview panel to question. That would include Stephanie, as well as the last one was our head of data sort of governance, to test the answers that have been given. So it depends. If I'm conflicted because I've been involved in a case earlier on, then I would expect that to be picked up by another chief officer effectively.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the question that I was going to ask was about the number of complaints that have been received in relation to statutory nuisance law. Are you aware of how many?
We don't have those numbers.
We will have
Yes,
some.
we do have them. We can provide that breakdown for you, yeah.
All right. So if basically PAC notes that legislation in this area is going to be updated, or it will require some update in line with modern standards. What impact do you think this legislation is going to have on your ability to act on a statutory nuisance complaint?
I would say there's quite a high bar to act on a statutory nuisance. It's so I do think we do see that it's the complaints I see is generally where we feel we've been unable to act, whether it be a noise or smell complaints. But one of the cases I dealt with recently was a noise. It was a noise in St Helier, and we didn't feel the statutory nuisance bar had been met. But the person complaining clearly has being affected by noise. So what I could foresee is that the bar probably gets lowered in terms of how we can deal with complaints. And therefore, I'd expect to see more complaints, and we'd probably hopefully get to see more resolution of things.
How do you think that the new legislation or an updating of the legislation might be more directed towards supporting the consumer as opposed to addressing the noise?
I think being clear, if I think about noise complaints, it's a lot of the issue is about data and evidence. So I think we need to be clear what is occurring, what role the consumer can play in collecting information, what sort of form we want it in, the validity of that information. We often, from a noise perspective, will issue noise monitors to people, and they can go into people's homes and they will self-record when noise is heard. So I foresee a greater accessibility from consumers, firstly.
Do you think there's a difference between addressing a statutory nuisance in relation to people different to an industry or another environmental issue?
I think there is. When you're dealing with, an industrial noise, it's a lot easier to track and monitor and understand where the problem's coming from, if it's something vibrating or being too loud. When you're dealing with human-to-human interactions, that's a lot harder to deal with, and it does rely on a lot more, human intervention ourselves to be there in person and to record human behaviour. Whereas if it's a mechanical part going wrong or the filter's not working, it's easier to track down, I would say. So I think we've got to be. It would certainly benefit the consumer. I think it would probably have quite a big resourcing implication for how we then, if you like, police the new law. Because I would probably contend we need more people out there. People's propensity to complain against each other has increased, and we've seen certainly the number of complaints go up, certainly post-COVID. A lot of people are working differently, and they sort of therefore see and hear a lot more than they used to, because a lot more people are working flexibly. So we have seen increases.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
In matter of dealing with suppliers and third parties, do you gather that feedback from them, and what response you had so far?
So I think one of the areas that we need to do better on is certainly contractor management. We employ a lot of third parties under contract, whether it be building jobs or maintenance, those sort of things. So I think that's an area that we need to do more on. That's quite labour intensive, so that's just a resourcing issue for us at the moment. So sometimes we get complaints that something hasn't been fixed, this hasn't been opened, the toilets haven't been cleaned. So that's where we see a lot of, commentary from third parties that come in, and then we have to chase the contractor and have you been out, and then they have to go out again, and so it's quite labour intensive. But I think that's an area that I think we need to do better in.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was helpful, and thank you for extra time.
No problem. Thank you.
The public hearing is closed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll follow up with the